everyone. Welcome to the Courtauld. My name is Michelle. I'm a doctoral researcher here at the Courtauld, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you today to the Courtauld and to our event today. The impact of motherhood within art schools and institutions in the UK, collaboratively organized by Joe Harrison and Hettie Judah from our Working Parents Alliance and myself. This event is also supported by Dr. Catherine Grant, Reader in Modern and Contemporary Art and Vice Dean for Education at the Courtauld. I'd like to thank all of them, as well as the brilliant Courtauld Research Forum team and our student assistants for making this event possible. I'd also like to thank the broadly conceived research network and interdisciplinary network of postgraduate students and early career researchers about the issue of reproduction at Birkbeck for providing additional support for this event. And first, I'll just give some housekeeping notes before we kick off the event. We will have 3 presentations followed by a short break. Tea and biscuits that some of you might have already known are set up in the Research Forum room to the right of this room. And you're welcome to bring some of those back with you for the discussions after the break. But please remember to discard your rubbish before you leave the event. We will reconvene at around 7:40 for the panel discussion and open discussion. The event will end promptly at around 8:30 p.m. And finally, there is only one toilet on this floor, which is the all-gendered one to the left of this room, but you can find more on the floor above and the floor below. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce my co-organizer for this event, Joe Harrison, who will be chairing this event. Joe Harrison is a curator and arts worker based in London whose practice focused on gender, work, and economies of care. She is director at Approach and runs Repronomics, a research project exploring social reproduction and cultural production as invisible and exploitable, labors of love under capitalism. She hosts an itinerant reading group with a focus on feminism, social reproduction, labor, and economics. Most recently hosted at May Day Rooms in spring 2024. Jo was previously curator at Almanac Projects. She had been a visiting lecturer at Birthrights Collection, Central St. Martin's, and Slade School of Art at UCL. She provides mentoring for artists and art workers. In October 2022, she co-founded the Art Working Parents Alliance with Hettie Judah. And without further ado, I'll welcome Jo to start the introduction for the speakers.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And I just wanted to just reiterate your thanks for you. You've been a brilliant co-organizer, and working with you on over the last few months in this project has been amazing. And thank you also to Catherine for being our academic sponsor, and to the Courtauld for hosting us, and Broadly Conceived Network for also sponsoring the event. So yeah, as Michelle said, we're going to be exploring the impact of motherhood on within art schools and institutions this evening, and we're using the term motherhood in the expanded sense of the word, and we're using it to encompass the experiences and challenges encountered during various stages of people's reproductive journeys. And so tonight was inspired by intelligence gathered with the Art Working Parents from the Art Working Parents Alliance, which is something that I co-founded with Hettie Judah here, and we are a peer network for parents who are also artists, art workers, academics, people within the art world. And we set up in October 2022, really trying to initially just make parenting visible to one another in an environment which otherwise kind of obfuscates us from one another. And as Michelle said, we're going to be having 3 speakers this evening. The first is going to be Kate McMillan, Dr. Kate McMillan, and I'm going to read your bio, which is here. So Dr. Kate McMillan is an artist and reader in creative practice at King's College London. Her practice and written research consider the role of art in attending to the impacts of the Anthropocene, lost and systemically forgotten histories of women, and the residue of colonial violence in the present. She was the author of the annual report, Representation of Women Artists in Britain, commissioned by the Freelands Foundation. She has undertaken research projects on gender inequality in the art world and is currently examining the experiences of parents working in the commercial art sector with Dr. Cleo Roberts-Comaretti. Her multidisciplinary art practice uses speculative fiction to reimagine feminist histories and futures. In May 2025, her new work, The River's Stomach, Songs of Empire, will be presented by the CoLab at the Roman Baths, Surrey Street in WC2. Our second speaker is going to be Izzy Kapoglu-Mensah, and she is Head of Equity and Inclusion at the Royal College of Art, where she laid the foundation for EDI through the Sir Frank Bowling Scholarship, re-established the EDI Committee and its working groups, and facilitated the implementation of race equity training and inclusive leadership programs and the Race Equality Charter Mark. She has over 20 years of experience working within the NHS, health-related organisations and higher education. She is the author and publisher of books for children, including Ajoa Goes to Nursery, Ajoa's Paddling Pool, Ajoa's New Arrival, Kwesi Finds His Football Team, and Kwesi's First Football Match. And finally, Hettie Judah will be the final speaker this evening, and she is a writer and curator. She is a regular contributor to The Guardian, Frieze and The Times Literary Supplement, and writes a monthly column for Apollo magazine. She is curator of the Hayward Gallery touring exhibitions Acts of Creation on Art and Motherhood, which opened at DCA Dundee on the 19th of April 2025, and that's the final iterations that we know of so far.
In the UK.
In the UK. And following publication of her 2020 study on the impact of motherhood on artists' careers, in 2021 she worked with a group of artists to draw up the manifesto, How Not to Exclude Artist Parents, now available in 16 languages. In 2022, together with me, Jo Harrison, Hettie co-founded the Art Working Parents Alliance, which, as I just mentioned, is a supportive network campaign group for curators, academics, gallerists, technicians, educators, and others working in the arts. Recent books include How Not to Exclude Artist Mothers and Other Parents, Lapidarium, The Secret Lives of Stones in 2022, and Acts of Creation on Art and Motherhood, which is 2024. And then finally, when we come back for our panel discussion, Leonora Lockhart is going to also join us to be part of the discussion. And Leonora Lockhart's artistic practice is rooted in feminist tradition and explores the influence of the domestic sphere on female identity and lived experience. Whilst at the RCA, and together with Isis Dove-Edwin, she co-founded Second Shift to interrogate the challenges of balancing careers, student life, and motherhood. Alongside a collaborative art practice, Second Shift are building a diverse community of artist mothers, fostering dialogue around the effects of motherhood on creative work, and actively seek out opportunities for collective exhibitions to help alleviate some of the barriers that artist mothers face in showcasing their work in a professional setting. Okay, so I think already from those bios you can get a little taste of what we're going to be discussing this evening. So I'm going to stop talking now and introduce Kate, who's going to be our first speaker. Thank you, Kate.
Most of you probably know me in this room, and so I never quite know what to say in terms of repeating myself. So the slides that I put together this evening, I have specifically looked at some research that looks at kind of the context of art and design schools in the UK. My interest in gender inequality in the art world really began about 13 years ago when I moved to London from Australia, and I realised what a big role the commercial art world had in shaping an artist's career and the problems associated with that. So a lot of this research really began with me looking at the commercial sector and the inequality within that, which is roughly kind of the exact reverse of art schools. So you have 70% of students roughly in art schools compared with 30% men. But in the commercial sector, that's completely reversed. And a lot of the insights that I'm able to talk about today is really thinking about the institutional structures that kind of inhibit equality in that context around kind of staffing and the financial constraints of the sector. I can start with the report that Jo mentioned that I authored for a few years which was commissioned by the Freelands Foundation, that looked at the representation of women artists in Britain. And one of the things that we mapped was which I've just sort of spoken about, is undergraduate and postgraduate gender kind of balance in the art schools. And you can largely see that, as I said, 70% of students on undergraduate programs are women. Most of them are white, as you can see from the kind of ethnicity data that we collected, and you can see those figures mirrored again somewhat in the postgraduate courses. In fact, the courses that I oversee, so I oversee 6 different programs, and we have about 90% women in our department, which is interesting. So obviously these are averages, and it will vary depending on different contexts. So if we want to mirror this, if we want to kind of then reflect on who's teaching those students, we also then mapped academic staff teaching in creative art and design schools. Now these statistics are from 2014 to 2020, so unfortunately the Freelands Foundation no longer do this report. I stopped doing it in 2021. They had one more report by Charlotte Burns, Bonham Carter, Charlotte Bonham Carter. Sorry, it's been a long day. And then they have subsequently stopped mapping this data. So unfortunately, we don't have any more up-to-date statistics than this. But what you can essentially see, which would be surprising to anyone, is that the highest paid staff are largely men, and the lowest paid staff are largely women. And when you look at the kind of non-white representation across staff, it's even worse. So women make up 53% of all teaching staff, only 43% of professors are women, an increase of 3% from the previous year, and so this was in 2021, and a substantial increase from 35%. So, you know, these statistics are improving. I took the opportunity last week to have a look at my own department, because, you know, we always need to start with the personal. So I oversee 53 staff, 23 of them have children, which includes 3 men and 20 women. But actually in our department, 41 of the 53 people are women and 12 are men, so women make up 78% of the staff in our department. We have 7 professors, 2 of them are men and 5 of them are women, and all our professors have children. So I was quite happy to look at that data. I don't know that I can necessarily take any credit for that, but nonetheless, again, these sorts of statistics will vary depending on where you work, and as I'll get onto in a minute, you know, it's largely dependent on the line manager you end up with. So I think one of the really important things to think about is the role of precarity in art schools, and why they are particular to art schools. So I should say, I don't work in an art school, I work in a culture, media and creative industries department. So I don't have to rely on precarious staff in the way that art schools do because of this. So studio spaces are no longer financially viable, particularly in London-based institutions. And this is because the actual estate costs are extortionate. So I know at King's, where I work, they will look at a space the size of a lecture theatre like this, and they will say, great, we can churn 120 students through 12 times a day and roughly have 1,500 students move through the space in one day. But if this was studio space, or a ceramic studio, or a printmaking studio, or something like that, obviously that same space would only really provide for 40 spaces or 40 students. So these are the kind of cost-benefit kind of ratios that that senior management are looking at when I say to them, I really want to have an art school at King's, and they just laugh at me. So if you're in an institution in the north or in a more regional area, you don't have these same problems because you don't have the same estate costs that we do in London. So most art schools offset this cost by having a disproportionate number of precariously employed staff. So you will find in a department like I run, where we have something like, I should really know this off the top of my head, about 1,000 students and 55 full-time permanent employees. If you had 1,000 students in an art school, you would not have 55 permanent employees, okay, because of the staffing ratio and, in studio. What you would end up to offset the cost of studio space and the time allocated to teaching practice is you'd have loads of hourly paid staff, people on fixed term contracts and so on. And so you can kind of see the breakdown of the figures there. Full-time academic on a research and teaching contract, such as myself, I only teach 8 hours a week at the most. This semester I'm teaching 3, okay? And I'm, depending on your level of seniority, what you're earning, and so we could actually import someone to do my job and it would cost £60 a week. So those are the kind of figures that universities are looking at. And obviously you only need to pay those staff during term time, which we know is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. So now students have 20 weeks of term time a year. So you can sort of see why art schools in that university kind of neoliberal framework seem less and less viable. So what does this mean if you're a parent? It means that your hourly paid staff on short-term precarious contracts employed possibly within those just teaching hours, and staff are often just given a take it or leave it option, like here's what we got, this is when we need, the timetables are all set in place. I'm setting timetables now for September for my staff. So if I'm employing someone at the last minute to cover some teaching, I'm not going to be able to work around their caring responsibilities. And so art schools, because they're always employing people at the last minute, it's very hard to support flexible working arrangements. And of course, this makes it impossible for people to make long-term childcare commitments, largely financially, but also just space in childcare facilities. So obviously that's probably quite obvious. So one of the things that I have, and I spent a long time working as a caseworker in my union, working across the college and hearing the experiences of people with all sorts of intersecting obstacles in their workplace, including being parents, so my department's amazing, obviously, but other departments, even within my own faculty, some of them can be really shit. Yeah. And it really depends on who your line manager is. So what happens with line management is like, okay, it's great, I work for the union, I know all of our policies inside out, I know what people can ask for and what they can't, but someone in my sister department, they might be an amazing academic and publish world-leading research, but they know nothing about employment law. So how you get employed, the conditions that you get employed in, are largely dependent on who you have making these sorts of decisions. So I guess for me, getting union advice is always really essential because your line manager does not very often know the law at all, in my experience. So these are the sorts of things that you can, I don't know why it's not showing the whole slide. These are the sorts of things that you can ask for. If you're a precariously employed person and you've been on a 4-year contract without a break, you can request under UK law to be made permanent. So lots of staff in art schools are just re-employed every year on a 1-year contract. So what you really want to do is make sure there's no break in your contract. So if you finish your contract on the 31st of August, make sure your next one's on the 1st of September. Obviously that's not always possible, but that continuous employment will give you the ability to request a permanent job. You can, of course, ask for flexible working arrangements and reasonable adjustments. That means that I've got a bunch of staff that with parenting needs, they aren't timetabled during school pickup time, for example, or staff with neurodivergent needs who only want to teach on one module each day. There's all sorts of things that you can kind of request. Carers leave, that's one thing that I've advocated with the union to bring in so that we have 5 paid days of carers leave now. It used to be unpaid. And of course, most universities will have 20 weeks of maternity pay on full salary, 52 weeks of maternity leave. And that's, check the paperwork, because even if you're on a 2-year fixed contract, you are often able to access a lot of these benefits if you've been at the university, I think, for more than 6 months. So you can sort of see that, our university also has subsidised childcare places as well. But these are not things, no one's telling you this stuff, right? So it's about, I guess, accessing things. So one of the things that I've been at King's now for over 10 years, and it's also just about, taking it upon yourself if there's something that's not right, to kind of change it if you can. So some of the small changes that I've been able to bring in is to have a email outside of work hours ban in my department, so no one is allowed to send an email outside of the hours of 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. They have to schedule certain things, because we found that junior staff or staff with caring responsibilities or whatever just felt this never-ending pressure that they should be working a weekend. You can work all weekend, but we just do not want to see that as being visible, particularly to junior staff. Other things were, I realised when I was organising an event a couple of years ago that some random person in the university had decided that children couldn't come on campus, so I just changed that. And it was actually really easy to change. It wasn't a big thing. So, I think we all encounter these little obstacles and we think, that's such a pain. But actually, these small things are easily changed sometimes. We can pick up any other questions, I guess, later, is whether there's other things that are kind of relevant to talk about. Hettie or Jo now?
I think that's it at the end.
Yeah.
After the break.
I'm
Okay.
sure there'll be the overlap as well.
Yeah.
It's amazing to have that context.
Excellent. Okay, I will sit down and I cut off. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Kay. You still have to do this. Okay, and now I would like to introduce Izzy Kapobi-Mensah for her presentation. Thank you.
I'd like to thank you all for inviting me in the first place. I have what I would call unenviable role of being the head of EDI at the Royal College of Art. And I've been there now, it'll be 5 years in July. And I inherited a very scary place that didn't know much from my perspective about EDI. My background was just over 25 years working in the NHS, and we tell people that if you don't do things right by EDI, people die. I couldn't quite get that to land well in higher education. So this is my third university, and I live in that space of the Equality Act 2010, which is not perfect, which does need updating, but there's probably ways we can tweak it. And I think that we're all finding ways to tweak it, because we tell them, the organisations that we work for, who we are, rather than them silos. Higher education, I've never seen so many silos, but we digress. So those of you who know anything about the Equality Act will know that there are 9 protected characteristics, and within that, pregnancy and maternity and marriage and civil partnership are included in that. However, it hasn't really got to the real nub around parenting in that space. It doesn't take into, as I've been saying, there's a whole life process from cradle to grave that we need to be thinking about our staff and our students, however people identify. And so this is me tweaking to make it make sense. Because whilst it's not a protected characteristic, it's still sort of protected under the Equality Act, and it should be part of everybody's education in that space. So thinking about things like flexible studying, if you have that request refused, that to me is a form of discrimination under any of those things, and you can challenge that. You know, so whether it's your gender, whether it's being pregnant and going on maternity leave, whether it's disability, whether it's, you can challenge them on that. We should be also making sure that people know how to use leave of absence, all those kind of things. So again, we know that what people think that disability is where you get the only place for a reasonable adjustment, but I think everything is about a reasonable adjustment. It's about navigating and negotiating and figuring it out. Because one thing I have found about universities is one person will know the truth and everybody else has to hunt to find it. And that has been even as the EDI person's role of trying to find out who knows what, where, when, and how and how we get that made more widely available to everybody and not just a few. So we do have a duty to eliminate unlawful discrimination, harassment and victimisation and other, behaviours that are prohibited by the Act. And I do hear negative stories about, people who have come to study and been barred from a space because of whatever. I've had that same issue with children not being allowed onto campus, and all it is something like our liability licence has to be updated so that it can happen. So why is it that when it's the day-to-day, the young person can't come, but we've got a whole wide more participation event, or we've got a show and children are all over it, but in the day, some of that just doesn't add up and make sense. So we have to make that make sense. And then we do have to make sure that we advance equality of opportunity between people who share characteristics and don't. Sometimes it's about getting the empathy of the people who are not walking in your shoes, and that's hard. And I mean, to your point about, I don't understand why there are more staff who identify as women in higher education, and yet the very areas that are controlled around these things don't have a sense of what women need in those spaces. So I've been fortunate that we had a lady in our estates team, and I go and I have a conversation and something happens, but that's the next bit about making the rest of the college know that this has happened is still a bit sticky. And again, everything is about how we foster good relationships between people who share the characteristics and who don't. But we also have to be mindful that we need to make accessibility accessible to everybody, again, not to just the few. And we are more than one protected characteristic. We identify as, we tell them how we identify, and that's what they use as, well, that's what people say is the complexity of things. And actually, I don't always think it's complex. I just sometimes think it just needs a bit of common sense. And it's not always common. So challenges. Pursuing postgraduate education as an artist is challenging because it's due to the demands of programs. So we used to be at RCA, when I started it was we had a 2-year MA program, and some other programs were slightly longer. Now we moved 2021-22 to a 1-year MA to be in line with the rest of the postgraduate spaces. We're still questioning whether that works in an art environment to be on a 1-year MA. So we had that. We created a 1-year MA an MFA, which is a way of doing it part-time, picking the modules that you want to do, and it was aimed at people who have got some lived experience but wanted to have a bit of a top-up. However, it's tended to work for the students who haven't got onto the MA. They've used that as an opportunity to get in, or the, progressing from the grad dip through. And so it's great that we have them. How people have accessed them, gained them and used them, been difficult. I don't necessarily know if the MFA would have been a better choice for mothers in this space, but I do know that the mothers do want to use, or the parents want to have access to an MA in a 45-week window and not be burnt out by the end. That's not the best way to actually study. And again, the balance of academic commitment with the need of family and other things going on in their life sometimes slightly goes out the window when you're getting towards a show. And anybody who knows what it's like to get ready for a show at RCA knows how stressful it is. It may look like a swan at the top, but the paddling of the feet underneath, it always seems to come together well, but nobody really appreciates, I don't think, the stress, the strains, and the late nights and all that kind of stuff that happens to get there. So people do need to take time away from their studies to manage their caring, and they end up having to take leave of absence. I don't think that that's always a fair way to go about it. I think if our curriculums could be a bit more flexible, if we maybe, one of the suggestions we have recently in reviewing the MA for 45 weeks was thinking, how could we align it to a school year? How could we have extra, so that we're having our annual leave, or whatever that we call it, aligned to children's breaks? And whilst in some ways that's still not a definite break for the parent, at least you've got less of a worry about, who's looking after the kid. You know that there is a break coming. Sometimes you don't get the full college experience, because if they put on all of the art things, all the shows, all the lectures, everything on in the evening, how many mothers get to go to, how many parents get to go to them? They're coming in, they're shooting out. So how do we make sure that when we're having guest speakers and lecturers and anything like that, we make it part of the day that they're going to be in, and that they're accessible again? The building of networks, how do we do that? How do people get the chance to do that? Those are all the parts of what the impact is if you don't get what you pay for and sign up for. And the stress, the fatigue, the physical, mental health, as well as the relationship with children, has to be considered when we are thinking about these curriculums. And part of we've always going through transformations, and part of my remit is who's looking at that. I can go into, I'm a professional services person by right, but I actually try to step into those academic spaces and bring in that conversation. Because it's been odd to me also that, and this might sound controversial, but the system or the structure of academia hasn't, with the majority women, mothers in the space, because I work in space, even our exec board is predominantly female. And I don't understand why it's so difficult to make those shifts, why the system works. It works for the few and it needs to work for more. So I've never really quite understood in academia why you can't make a change when most of the people who are in this space at some point may have children, may go through the menopause, may go through so many different things in their career, but the system doesn't always accommodate that. So I try to be part of that change and make them think differently, get our female academics to actually be part of the needing to reflect, because how they learned and grew up in the space, they're now in those spaces where they should be able to have the influence and the change. But sometimes that's a bit disjointed from outsider looking in. So that's that's part of the conversation that needs to happen, I think. What's the sphere of influence that can be had in making those changes to curriculum and all of those things? Because sometimes it's one stone and the ripple benefits everybody and not just the people who it's aimed at. So some of this, in some ways for me, is a bit controversial. And I say controversial is, if we have GDPR and as a parent, you want to be able to go and access, but you're afraid that because you say that you're pregnant or you're going to be a mother or whatever the reason is, yes, we want to encourage early communication, but it's not just to anybody, it has to be safe for people to be able to do that. They have to know that they're not going to get penalised for doing that. They want to be able to know that whoever, like you're saying, the line manager that they tell, or the tutor, or that whoever it is going to be supportive and make sure that they look at the inclusion, create an inclusion plan. We don't want people going into unsafe spaces like some of the workshops can be. But what do we do as an alternative? Rather than tell you to take a leave of absence, it's that kind of, we're in creative spaces, there must be a creative way around it, is my sort of thinking in that. And absolutely make sure that there is a support plan. So it makes the academic adjustments work. It has the health considerations of the person as an individual in place. You know, and think about how scheduling works in that space. We have become more fluid, more hybrid, more all of these kind of flexible. How do we make it work for a student so that or a member of staff, so that they can get the best out of their career in this space as much as they're getting out of their time studying? Again, health and safety. We do need to do more risk assessments. I'm sorry, straight up and down, I don't think that there's enough done. I don't think that we've got very good at recognising what risk could look like for, you know, if I'm a mother or a parent coming in or a pregnant person coming in, how am I expected to know what could be a risk? I'm expecting there to have been somebody I can help to say that this and that, but to actually not have anybody to speak to or have an understanding is where the problem with not having necessarily the networks or the resource or the student support can go so far, but I don't necessarily know that it knows every nuance for every school or every programme, so there has to be something about how we think about that. And then, yeah, access to facilities. It's not just about having a breastfeeding room, although that's so cool if you've got one. It's about being able to safely use the spaces that you have access to, you know, and recognising that sometimes people are in those spaces alone. We have the OFS, sexual harassment, coming in. We have to have all of these policies addressed and fixed. Why not let them include something about mothering, parenthood, and so on and so forth? And then also importantly, we live in London. I don't care whether somebody's got a scholarship, however it works, going to art school is expensive. And any time during the year with the government going up and down all over the place, somebody might find themselves in hardship. They need to be able to know about the funds that are pertinent to them as a parent and not just the bog standard, because they probably need a little bit more than whatever the bog standard is. And access to any resources in that space is going to be key. So then flexible learning, part-time, distance learning options, scheduling allows for childcare. We're having a conversation just now. I don't understand why, if you haven't got a nursery on campus, that's also with the way that land is going, that's also a bonus these days. How can the university should be having a conversation with local authorities to think about, if you've got a university in your area that's a high population of people who are going to come in and build the economy, therefore spaces in nurseries and schools also feeds into that economy. So making sure that there is that link and that connection so that parents can have those, whether it's staff or students, have that ability to have children go to either a creche, go to nursery, Buzzy bee vouchers, I'm really old. So Buzzy bee vouchers, all that kind of stuff, making it local for them so that it's still part of their route, instead of having to run from their lesson to their home to this, that and the other. And whilst we do have access to studios at RCA now on weekends, the big ask is for availability on a Sunday. So what does a 24/7 campus look like? And for the same reason about money is everything, these things would only happen if the students are aware of them and will use them. And they can't have to wait till a week before show to get access to any form of studio or workspace. So again, with that comes the consideration of the lone working policy and the panic alarm, whatever it might be. There's all of those things why they're hesitant. But I do see hours extending during the week. Saturday we're open till 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and stuff, something like that. It's improving, but it's quite slow. I have a feeling that where the RCA is going through another transformation and fixing a building, it will need to generate more income. And in generating more income, it will be open longer hours. So you can see some of those changes in the future, but not necessarily now. So yes, as I was saying, on-campus childcare, partnerships with local childcare providers, local creches, and one of the most important is the on-site facilities for mothers who are breastfeeding. That has been so hit and miss any and everywhere I've been. I've watched them close nurseries rather than open them, literally just after they've got a letter in the Swanhood. Anyway, that's a different story for a different day. I'm happy to say that we've actually been able to do that at RCA, but the problem is not all the mothers who are needing of it know where it is. And that has to change as well. It's about the communication of it. And yeah, there needs to be that sense of work-life balance. Just because you're a student doesn't mean you don't need work-life balance. You do, and you need to be able to come out of it better and not worse, not suffering from the experience, in my humble opinion. So they talk about resources like our employee assistance program, yes, because there's elements of counselling and stuff in that. Yes, in an ideal world you get support from your schools. We have a line managers forum now, and we teach. So anything that changes in the law now, so the Neonatal law, all of these things that have changed, we're teaching the managers, because we do know that our academic line managers are academics first, don't know about these things. And we're doing all things like conflict resolution stuff. We're just giving that, when they ask, I don't know how to talk to somebody when they've made a claim around something to do with bullying or harassment and stuff. Apart from the times when I get to go in and have the conversation about freedom of speech and telling people that, yes, you can have your freedom of speech, but please, let's try not to be discriminatory. Or if we're going to be discriminatory, let's have the conversation as to why you think this is freedom of speech, so on and so forth. So having those kind of conversations and giving people accountability and responsibility, not taking it away, but giving accountability and responsibility, that's what some of that support looks like for in schools, rather than I'm just going to bat it to student experience, or I'm just going to bat it to HR, or it's about building capacity and capability in the spaces so that everybody's experience is better. and we're not just waiting for an NSS, PTES, and PRES to tell us that we've been rubbish. It's always important to touch base with the student support team as a sort of independent space from your school. And then you've got EDI centres, which there's only me who covers the whole of the university, and my EDI officer just covers the staff side. So bear with me, I'll get there, but it's that, yeah, it's a fight, and it shouldn't have to be. And it's always about looking for the opportunity for me. And my activist says, well, if you put it to them like this, then they'll have to sit up and say, well, yeah, I have to think about that now. And that's the difference, is that the language we are using is, we've got the evidence, we've had the evidence for ages. It's just about using a language that makes them do what they're supposed to do in that space. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you so much for that. Next up is Hettie Judah.
Good evening. I've got the most ridiculously enormous presentation. I've got to try and squeeze into about, I think currently it's 3 minutes, but I'm sure we'll make it through. So I'm not an academic, so I'm kind of here under slightly kind of a fraudulent aegis, but my presentation today is really reflecting the kind of surveys that I've been sending out to the Art Working Parents Alliance. So I'm going to start off by presenting a lot of people's experiences, and then at the end I'm going to present some suggestions, in fact, which a lot of them really absolutely echo everything that Izzy and Kate have said already, and indeed a draw on Lulu's kind of work with Second Shift as well. So the first thing I just wanted to bring up is what I see as a kind of pervasive culture of fear. And I mean, when I was writing my book, How Not to Exclude Artists, Mothers and Other Parents, I noted even in that everybody that's talking either about a student experience or the experience of being an academic wanted to remain anonymous. And it was really notable that of all of the people that I interviewed in that book, they were the only sector that insisted on anonymity. And it's quite extraordinary how this seems, and it's not just one college, it's all colleges. And also within the institutions, you know, Kate was talking about the precarity of everyone's employment contracts. You just hear it again and again. People are terrified of speaking up. And exactly, I think, I can't remember which one of you it was that said, you know, it's a take it or leave it situation. So, you know, you have people going for interviews. Another mother I met at the in-person interview stage advised me not to mention being a mother, so I did not. People are scared to bring up the fact that their mothers are interviewing. While senior or male colleagues may speak openly about caregiving, junior or less secure staff often face higher performance expectations and fear discrimination. It was hourly paid work. Due to the unstable nature of this kind of contract, I was asked back at haste and committed to going back 1 day a week when my son was just 4 months old and refusing bottles. If I felt like I had any option here, I would not do this again. I had to show my dedication and to be in the running should a permanent position come up. It didn't and hasn't. And yeah, like every response I got, I gave everybody the option of giving their name and the name of their institution. These, I mean, I just cut and paste these, you know, went on and on and on. Nobody wanted to speak out openly. So there's clearly like this extraordinary culture of kind of fear that's pervasive around academia about speaking out about negative experiences around maternity and caregiving. There are also, you know, obviously lots of really lovely old-fashioned patriarchal hangovers that people experience. When I announced my pregnancy to my line manager, he said, "Oh my God," then remembered a more appropriate, "Congratulations." In a meeting, a colleague announced her pregnancy and received the response, "Fuck," from a senior colleague. So there's this idea that this is just a kind of, you know, an inconvenience that people are going through, rather than, you know, like, "Yay, this is wonderful. How can we help you and accommodate you and make sure we retain you and staff?" I feel like having kids has put me in a position of endless precarity. There is no single person or policy I can blame, no gross act of injustice, but the entire system places demands on us that are impossible for mothers of young children to fulfill. And I would say that's not just mothers of young children, it's parents in general. I became conscious that some artists almost look down on other artists who want to have children. It's as if we can no longer be perceived as serious artists. A female colleague had a child, incidentally the only other member of permanent staff in our department to take maternity leave during my 15 years teaching there. A male colleague made a joke, X is having a baby, which of course is totally illegal. They were referring to the culture within the art world of the artwork before all else. And this to me really points to a specific issue with art schools, not just, separate from other kind of parts of higher education. And, Kate and Izzy have touched on some reasons why that's a structural issue, but there's also a huge cultural issue around maternity and caregiving. This is from a student. Despite passing first year with flying colours, I was called into the office at the beginning of second year. I had sent an email outlining that because of changes to the timetables at the very last minute, I would, due to childcare, find it very difficult to be in at certain times. I had scheduled childcare around the timetable as previously given and was asking for small allowances based on the changes. During this conversation, they told me they didn't think the course was suitable for me, that I should try a local art college, and they thought I was going to fail. They also said that they would email me to this effect so that they would not be blamed if I did fail. They advised me they did not think I would pass such a demanding course as a mother with a young child. So this was from 5 years ago. There are also...
say which
I know.
You know,
I know,
yeah.
but no, I mean,
Yeah,
it was very much asked to be kept. I had to make a special request to include that one actually, because that was initially not even meant to be shared, but I thought it merited quite serious inclusion. For academics, there are serious impediments to professional development if you have caregiving responsibilities. The professional advancement model in higher education often assumes availability outside of standard hours, privileging those without caregiving obligations and reinforcing structural exclusion. A lot of the opportunities require being able to travel abroad and stay overnight, being involved in symposia, etc. And this is very hard for me as I would be bringing my child, but do not have childcare in these locations. Therefore, I can't take these opportunities when they are offered. Staff without children have been offered more work and haven't had to interview, as far as I'm aware. A close male colleague of mine was offered full-time work on the same durational fixed-term period I am currently working, but part-time, and that I had to interview for. My line manager relegated me to an administrative role in the list of responsibilities. He frequently offered my colleagues opportunities without letting me know. Every so often, one would say to me, "But what about your work?" I would feel guilty that I was not exhibiting and ambivalent about the contractual requirement to continue my own independent research beyond teaching. I did not really have enough space physically, psychologically, or financially. I've been offered the same opportunities for professional advancement as my colleagues without caregiving responsibilities, though I've had to turn things down because the workload would have been too high to balance with being a parent. I've also missed CPD due to being part-time and not being able to switch things around due to childcare. So some of the issues with development are, and advancement are structural, some of them are cultural, to do with prejudice, and some of them are just to do with time management as well.
What is CPD?
Continuing professional development, is that right? There's also been some really interesting instances of implicit bias. When queried why I was offered a part-time job instead of the full-time job I had applied for at a university, I'd been working at precariously for years. Sorry, I'll say that again. When I queried why I was offered a part-time job instead of the full-time job I had applied for at a university I'd been working at precariously for years, the full-time post was given to a man, I was told by a female manager, mothers prefer to work part-time usually. So this also goes to the thing of women not necessarily being the greatest.
Can I just say,
This
this
is
is so
so
illegal.
It's
It's so
Yeah.
illegal.
It's screaming at me because even when this even when this comes up when we're talking about a thing in Swan,
Oh my
that is so archaic.
Yeah,
That there.
that was from last year. I recently noticed that I've been offered lower pay compared with a male colleague hired at the same time for the equivalent job and with much less experience. The only difference between our situations is that I took out 1 year of maternity leave and he didn't. However, it is very hard to prove this being the reason.
Gender pay gap.
Yes, you can.
Mm-hmm. I like being positively held by you. Colleagues without children or caretaking roles have rapidly moved forward. An added difficulty and irony of this is the assignment of non-progressing work to mothers and caregivers. A pattern emerges of allocation of students or tasks involving neurodiversity, disability, mental illness, and non-English speaking. I've even heard this spoken about in terms like, you, they are a mother, so will understand. So the issues and solutions can be managerial as well as institutional. This absolutely speaks to what Kate was saying about the fact that it absolutely depends on your line manager and your line manager's willingness to be amenable. And I mean, I'm not going to read all of these because they're really shocking, but basically it's like, I experienced 6 years of a hostile manager insisting we were on site 9 to 5, requesting key decisions between 6 and 9 a.m., emailing at 11 p.m., bullying and exploiting vulnerabilities, including caregivers. A colleague had to leave a late afternoon meeting to collect her baby, and the manager refused this, even though the mother explained if she was late, the nursery could report her to social services. They later applied different expectations to a father. When that manager left, I was deeply moved when the temporary manager said to me, "Family comes first," and allowed me flexibility to care for my daughter after an operation. We had a feminist pro-vice chancellor who opened training for women to become professors and put protections in to stop 24-hour work emailing. I mean, this kind of repeats a lot, but I mean, like, there are people that have just basically said, you know, I had a good experience, it was entirely because of my line manager. I had a bad experience, it was entirely because of my line manager. And quite often it is to do with people having relevant experience. So this research and teaching fellow had a former dean who had a child with additional needs and was extremely open about the demands that placed on him. So, you know, quite often when people have relevant experience, it really informs the way that they treat their colleagues as well. So there are also positive changes and initiatives, it's not all bad news, and we can learn from these, and I'll just kind of go through some of them before we get to my recommendations. So this is a PhD student and lecturer at Kingston, so she took her baby to PhD study groups and was welcomed. She received funding for childcare, there was a university creche, she had part-time teaching offered with adaptations for the first sessions. She also got bereavement leave, so these things are all possible. Possibly the rent in Kingston's a little lower than it is in, you know, Kensington.
But that's a lot better than when I was there.
Yeah, well, possibly it's thanks to you being there.
It's not like that if you're a student.
Right, okay, that's
No.
quite interesting. And it's interesting because also for a lot of these places I've had people responding from within the same institution who've had radically different experiences, which again goes back to the line manager and who it is that's dealing with you. If anybody's interested to look it up, this is a manifesto that Sally Sutherland put together for Making and Feeding Futures at St Martin's, which is basically about asserting the presence of mothers within the student body. So you can download that at the website that's presented there. She's also, I think she's presented this at the House of Parliament and it was shown on site at St Martin's. And this I thought was an amazing thing at Newcastle University. They have a returners fund, which is a pot of money you can apply for and are guaranteed to get to kickstart your research career if you've taken time for caring responsibilities. That's really good, and that's what's interesting is that that's university-wide, but it also then applies to the art school because quite often when we've got these good initiatives coming through, they're not from the art departments, they're from elsewhere. And of course, at King's, Kate McMillan. Sorry, Kate, just don't look at that. But anyway, she's done all these good things, which we'll talk about afterwards, but she mentioned them before. So just as a kind of recap, there are all kinds of different changes that we need. We need structural changes, such as caregivers in decision-making roles. We need infrastructural changes, like the provision of lactation spaces. We need policy changes, such as the support for pregnant students and faculty. And we need cultural changes, which includes understanding caregiving as a norm, not an inconvenience. Some of this costs money. A lot of it costs no more than a change in attitude. And a personal observation. And this comes from kind of being a guest lecturer at lots and lots of art students around the country. There is a tendency to hide behind the institution rather than acknowledging the power we have to create change as individuals within that institution. So I'll be there talking about motherhood, and the kind of lecturer that invited me there kind of like, oh, you know, Warwick, or you know, Edinburgh, or you know. And it's that thing of like, you kind of shrug your shoulders and kind of go, oh, it's just like this here. Again, it goes absolutely back to your thing of, only one person knowing the truth. And this is, what I've described as the Rumpelstiltskin get out, which is that it's easier to hide behind the institution if it's hard to name those who are in a position to make change at a policy level. And I think one thing that could be quite interesting, and you can do this anonymously, is identify the people within your institution that are in a position to make a change at policy level and name them, because I think once they're named, it makes it a lot harder to kind of hide behind that, oh, well, you know what the Royal College of Art's like, kind of, culture. So I'm really sorry I'm taking a bit of time, but I'm just kind of quickly going to some suggestions here. Firstly, ensure that mothers, parents are in policy-making positions at art school. So we've got a couple of testaments from responders here. Having been through a life cycle of employment as a mother, I feel policy and legal protection is the only way to create lasting structural change. Policies only go so far. It's important that for there to be better understanding of caregivers' experience, especially in complex situations. Number 2, align terms and reading weeks with terms and half terms of local state schools. So far this academic year, my son has had to attend 3 different holiday clubs to be able to accommodate my work hours. And I've also had particular response from parents who've got neurodivergent children who say, my kids can't even go into normal holiday clubs, so what the hell am I meant to do? I've started a new position at X college where the university holidays do not match up or even overlap with school holidays. It's terribly unfamily friendly. 3, I know we've talked about the cost of doing this kind of thing in London, but not everywhere is London. Reinstate a creche. There used to be a creche at the Royal College of Art in the 1980s, but it was closed, apparently. I don't really understand where creches went and why no one seems to want to go near the idea of having them. 4, offer peer-to-peer support for returners. So this is something that you get often in institutions. So, for example, I've been working with Dundee Centre for Contemporary Art recently on an exhibition, and when people come back from parental leave, they're immediately offered kind of just like check-ins and peer-to-peer support, just to make sure stuff is going okay. I would have appreciated assistance with getting back into work after long periods of leave, which left me feeling disconnected from my subject. Normalise the taking up of paternity leave, because under patriarchy we all suffer. Although I'm aware of the gender imbalance in terms of how much easier it seems to be for men to complete PhDs, and anybody who wants support for that statement, study that. Get lectureships and receive professorial promotions despite having children. I'm also aware of how much less likely they are to ask for concessions for childcaring purposes, presumably due to stigma. This is borne out.
And they have a wife.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, I know. I'm just.
also removing stigma is also important. This is borne out in the lack of take-up of extended parental leave, and it enforces both unequal professional opportunities and unequal caring responsibilities in an ongoing way. So I think really supporting male colleagues to kind of have a culture where they feel they can take their full extended paternal leave is really important as well, because then it starts to make all of this everybody's problem, not just mothers, but also all parents. Implement supportive policy for pregnant students and faculty. My college had no option for PhD students to take maternity leave, so I had to take a leave of absence and was threatened with deportation when I was 8 months pregnant due to being an international student. While pregnant, I was timetabled for extended full days without breaks, leaving no scheduled time to use the bathroom or eat. I had to explicitly state my requirement to eat and piss to be able to perform the functions of my role and to maintain a healthy pregnancy. I had to refuse to work without breaks. 7, as per Kate, offer flexible working contracts. I know a mother teaching in a business school here who was given a timetable that meant she could drop off and collect her children from school every day. So she only lectures between 10 and 2. Yeah. I wouldn't get colleague support if I proposed that. When I began, I had a child in primary school. My role allowed for some flexibility, but my manager suggested working hours that fitted around the school run, so some colleges do this. Overall, the flexibility I've experienced comes from my immediate manager who has children and has always been very understanding of my childcare responsibilities. Designated lactation room. This is not to do with art schools, but architects, says one senior tutor at an art and design school. We are all here from art and design schools, so we also need to be talking to our architecture and design departments about this. This needs to be something that they're taught as standard. When working on a public art project, a young male architect deemed the toilets, in fact, the actual toilet, as an appropriate place for a mum to breastfeed.
Oh, what?
There was not enough room for a chair, apparently. I pumped in a borrowed office for a while, and it was excruciating. I was so worried about someone walking in. I didn't manage to request a better space. It felt a difficult subject to bring up. I used to pump in the accessible toilet on the floor, as I didn't have an office key at the time. I'm just going to remind you, if you are pumping milk, you are producing milk for an immune-suppressed individual to consume. So you should not be doing it in the toilet. This is what UNICEF says you should be providing. This is not like some hippie shit. I think I showed these at, UNICEF. This is what you're meant to provide.
This is what I used to get the one in our
thank you.
college now.
So comfortable chair, refrigeration, tap, lock, and possibly natural daylight, among other things, and Wi-Fi.
And the only thing that was missing on the door that we have is the engaged sign.
Right. But as you say, there's a thing where on those campuses where they exist, people don't know they exist and they don't know how to direct people to them. So there was no responder to the survey that said that their college had a lactation space. They don't know. Yeah. And I think, there are also guidelines as to how many, per how many people, how many lactation spaces there should be per how many women of childbearing age there are on that campus as well. Outlaw last-minute timetable changes. It's so interesting, Kate, giving context to this. That was so important to kind of explain why this is such a big issue, and thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah.
But it's such a massive issue for people with childcare. Timetables for coming years have provided it unreasonably short notice of parents. This is a common complaint with many fellow mature students. I've been very frustrated by the disorganisation and slowness of information sharing, so it's hard to plan ahead for when I need to book childcare. So this isn't just to do with precarious employment, this is also to do with lessons and lectures. Perhaps that's the language that's going to make schools listen, which is, these are your clients. The other people who are giving you money, we need to listen to their needs. As per Kate, and sending emails out of hours. As per, this conversation that Kate's also had and that Lulu has also raised as part of second shift. Permit children on campus. I also think part of this thing around children on campus is because there's a failure of imagination around what a child actually is. People think child and they think toddler, but actually a child can also be, a teenager. Or quite a sensible kind of 8-year-old or something.
Or our students, because we do occasionally have 17-year-old students.
Yeah. When I do art historical work, people start in the slave school at 13. Very talented young women. There's a lot of stuff about, particularly for students, not being able to complete assignments on time because they can't come in with their children. But this also very much pertains to the lecturers as well. This absolutely speaks to what Izzy was talking about the fact that one person knows the truth and everybody else has to find it. Publicise your policy on and precedents for supporting caregivers. So people really couldn't find, what people who'd come before them had got when they'd asked for maternity leave, when they'd asked for special provisions. It is, again, it's exactly what you're saying. It's like everybody's having to do this research. It's just not out there in the open. And absolutely, as you were discussing, make studios accessible during weekends and holidays. Really, really important for lots of students and for programme leaders as well. And a final one, which is really, really dull, but really, really important, because we've been talking a lot about childcare. So at the moment, we've got this changing childcare provision. So point number 14, support staff on 0 hours contracts to meet the baseline for funded childcare. And this is a real issue, and this particular issue around everything that we've been talking around with last-minute timetable changes. So from September 2025, so that is this coming September, eligible working parents can access 30 hours of government-funded childcare for children aged between 9 months and 4 years old, that's primary school age, for 38 weeks of the year. To be eligible, those over 21 must earn at least £2,380 before tax over each 3-month assessment. So that's equivalent to £183 per week. This can be through a combination of employed and self-employed income, and earn less than 100 grand per year. Well, that would be difficult if anybody in higher education. But we're paid well over 100 grand, aren't we? And if you're in a couple, both parents must meet these thresholds. So this is for a couple in which both parties are working, but for less than 100 grand. What I was particularly finding is, for example, with people who are coming back from maternity leave, having been promised they'd be going back to, let's say, 8 days of teaching a week, they're actually going back and they're getting 4 days of teaching a week, or 4 hours of teaching a week. And as Kate said, this can be like £20 an hour. So they're earning £80 a week, so they're not making the threshold for this, which then means they have to pay for childcare. And it's really, it would just make such a huge difference to people just to ensure that they're hitting that threshold, because suddenly it makes it worthwhile them working as opposed to actually having to pay for childcare on top of not getting enough hours as well. So that is the end of my extremely overlong presentation, so thank you.
I'll hand it over to. Thank you so much, and thanks to the speakers who all of this. These presentations this evening were depressing but inspiring, and I think it just really sort of shows some of the issues that people face in their workplace. I mean, I'm not an academic either, but just hailing from the commercial sector within the art world, these testimonials, particularly that you gave in your presentation, Hettie, I felt like I know those people, or I am those people, and so it can really ripples through throughout many people's workplaces. I'm sure it's not specific to academia. However, we're here in this context, so. Just to begin, because Lulu wasn't here to give or didn't give a presentation, I just wanted to start with you just to give a little bit of an introduction to the work that you were doing with ISIS in the second shift.
Hi, everybody. I set up second shift in 2021-22 with a colleague, Isis Dive Edwin, whilst we were at the Royal College of Art on our MA. And we did it in response to our own lived experience whilst we were there, and the issues that kept coming up over and over again as we were trying to navigate doing our MAs at the RCA with these huge expectations on us, and juggling that with our families and our kids. And we have quite neurodivergent type children that, although they were fairly adult, not real, teenagers, that it still required, a lot of input from us as mums. And it was the conversations we had together with each other was what got us through trying to negotiate this path. And we would decide that we really wanted to carry that on. And we wanted to find out whether it was just us as well, or whether it was other people, because we had no idea. We were in isolation. We were like these two mums sort of floundering around. And we decided to set up some workshops, roundtable discussions. We put a call out for mothers, parents, carers to come and chat with us. And there were very common themes that kind of permeated throughout all those groups. And then after we left the RCA, we graduated in 2023. We carried second shift on afterwards to try and build a sort of diverse community of mothers and carers, giving opportunities for exhibitions. We ran a residency in the summer. We were offered a residency and we applied for that residency on the basis that we would give it to mother artists to come and do some work as day residencies, because that opportunity to go abroad for 6 weeks just ain't going to happen. So this was, unfortunately, it was London-based mums, and just for this particular residency, but they could come and go, and it could go down on the CV as a residency and the rest of it. And that's what we continue to do, as well as make work together and have our own independent practices around that.
Thank you. Kate, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned it briefly, which was just to speak a little bit about the work that you've been doing with Clio, about the commercial sector.
Yeah. I mean, they're really similar themes, so but so much worse in the commercial art world, because actually, even though there are like really shitty line managers in HE, there is nonetheless very good policies, even if the line managers aren't applying them. Whereas it's a free-for-all in the commercial art world. And so Cleo and I did Cleo Roberts Comaretti and I did a survey, and I think we got about 50 respondents back from people who work in the commercial art world about their experiences of becoming parents. And from that we sort of analysed that data, and we then went on to do a series of interviews over 6 months, and holy shit was it bad. Like, I would need to almost have a trigger warning at the front of the journal article, which is due for submission next Friday. And yeah, it was really bad. But, the same sorts of conditions, in terms of like precarious employment, rogue line managers, all of that sort of stuff. So it's similar in that way. It's just that there's no kind of, one of the big things that really came out, even in large multinational commercial galleries, is no professional HR. And obviously, even though HR doesn't really feel like they've got your back sometimes in HE, they at least exist.
The HR also in the commercial sector they're employed to support the
organisations, and they often just don't even know anything about employment law. They're the director's like cousin from blah blah or whatever. They don't necessarily have expertise, whereas obviously in a university they should, even if they are working for the organisation and not you. But yeah, similarly to what Hettie said about this sort of culture of fear, of just not wanting to speak out. So obviously all of our interviews are anonymous. Yeah.
Thank you. Izzy, I have like sort of 2 questions for you. One which was alluded to by you, and actually just Hettie in her last presentation, which was to do with accountability. And you're the one person in the RCA, for example. I guess what were they doing before they had you? And how can an institution be made accountable when they're hiding behind a body rather than an individual?
The honest answer is I honestly don't know. I do know how I got the job. Our chart house, it doesn't matter, it's in the premise. So you will find that many institutions have some form of scandal that requires EDI to happen. So, and I shouldn't probably say it was a scandal, but when George Floyd was murdered, they didn't necessarily have my role, and they proceeded to recruit a white male man. It caused a furore. That furore was a letter from alumni, staff and students. 800 people signed it and said, we have no confidence in the college. And at that point, it then gave them the opportunity, because with all these things, there's always an opportunity. So it gave them an opportunity to get some help in, to get them to do an assessment, to figure out that they absolutely needed somebody to come in and do EDI in the whole. And the remit for mine initially was around becoming an anti-racist institution.
Excuse me, I'm awfully
Sorry,
I can't hear.
Oh, sorry. Does that make it better? Sorry. So basically, I came in because they wanted to become an anti-racist institution. And so this is my 3rd university. So before that I worked at UCL, and I also worked at Kingston, and then before that I was doing EDI in the NHS, as I mentioned. Yeah. So the premise for me coming in was that my sense about EDI happening there would have been it's only in that HR staff space, annual report possibly, although the biggest shocker for me coming into higher education is nobody collects data unless you're an academic. And anytime you want to collect data in that staff's perspective, it's not GDPR is a problem. For me, that sometimes is used as an excuse. And it's just the capacity or the capability to be able to collect that. It's not necessarily something that's been invested in. Bigger universities definitely will invest in it. But when you're a smaller institution, much smaller teams, you have to pick and choose what things you can focus on and do really well versus what things can be developed over time. And that's where we are. We've developed our data sets and so on and so forth. So I work across both staff and students. There's only me really in that capacity, and I do have an EDA officer who works specifically in the staff space and stuff. So we are evolving. It's taking its time, and it's a lot of, as I keep saying, I do believe that this stuff happens, but it's really luck of the draw. And I need it to get to a stage where it's consistent throughout and it's accessible to everybody throughout. I don't see EDI as you are one of 9 protected characteristics. I do see it intersectionally, and it has to be approached intersectionally. It's always been about the opportunity for me, and common sense isn't common, but it's really got to be about what's the opportunity to make the change here, and then I can deal with the appetite or lack of.
We talk about that all the time in Art Working Parents, that when people come to us and we hear all the time these sorts of testimonials that Hettie put in her presentation, and actually those responses that actually all 3 of you came up with, it's because there are consistent things that can be done to make changes, and those benefit everybody. They don't just benefit parents or mothers or carers, they really benefit all.
Absolutely. For me, one of the biggest things about how people should think about EDI is it's a reasonable adjustment for the better of everybody.
I know we've not been able to, as you said, there's no kind of data gathering going on. I'd be really interested to get a sense of, for example, Lulu, what proportion of the postgraduate students did you think were parents when you were there, and what proportion of faculty do we think are parents? Just roughly.
It's hard to say because I didn't see across all the courses, and we put a call out for people to come to us. So it was very hard to see what that differentiation was. They were quite small numbers actually, simply because even committing to do an MA or to go to art school when you've got kids is so huge. You're having to sacrifice so much that the numbers aren't massive, and those students that were doing it really felt that they had to struggle to get through it. They felt quite other.
Yeah.
Is the way. And like Izzy's saying, and then you add intersectionality into it, and you have a sort of hot pot for sort of a lot of isolation.
I would also speculate that that's also very London specific, because I think the cost of going to university is so insane if you live in London, whereas you can probably afford to live on a part-time wage if you live elsewhere in the country, which means, so yeah. I mean, another thing which I didn't mention that is also interesting is I've been developing a number of online MAs, and this is really interesting in terms of capturing another demographic of people who have disabilities, or they work, or they have caring responsibilities, or they can't afford to live in London or whatever. So it's also thinking about how we deliver our teaching, and it's a no-brainer to make your MA program applicable to part-time students. I mean, I'm shocked to hear that there's some universities that don't enable that. That's absurd. But then just to sort of bore everyone perhaps with these irritating institutional obstacles. So for example, our timetabling system, if you are a student in a wheelchair, there is no way to flag you on our timetabling system. So I can't ensure that student has been allocated to accessible spaces for all of their classes unless I manually go through and check.
Is this a GDPR thing, or is it?
No, it's just the timetabling software that the university has invested millions in, that they're not going to, that can't do this. It's just not something that the timetabling system does. So these are the sorts of insane things that make. Yeah.
It's also that they don't talk to each other.
No.
We from the point of registry through to the actual timetabling, whatever it is, it sometimes feels like we are beholden to systems that don't talk to each other, and we don't have a one system fits all, because there's going to be a bit of an HR bit when you're trying to measure the staff ratio to that student, or you're going to then measure how they're paying their fees, or the system that they have to use to upload their portfolio, and then we have to go in and we're allocating for school. It's just a minefield as to why they don't talk to each other. So it's not surprising that we might lose a disabled student in the space, we'll lose a parent in the space, and we'll have to, I'm not opposed to manually doing it, but it's how can we make our systems more agile?
Yeah.
Can't do it anywhere else. Why wouldn't we be, And just to also say, what goes on in the private sector, the reason, so even with an HR system or team that might not be perfectly correct, one of the things that we should be utilising more is our public sector equality duty, and that's the requirement to annually say, like we have the gender pay gap and hopefully one day the ethnicity and disability pay gap. Any institution has a public responsibility, so the NHS does it every year. We do it sort of in the HESA return. Those are the kind of spaces and places where the data is supposed to say who's attending where and what. We're spread over 3 campuses and soon to be 2. If you can imagine that if it's such small numbers, which was the case with our Becoming Anti-Racist thing and how our RCA Black network started, you may go from campus to campus and be in a different school and not know a single person who's in a similar scenario to you, which is why the coming forward is also difficult. That is changing. The way that the MA works, it's interdisciplinary. We've got this module called Across RCA where we sort of force everybody from all different walks of schools to come together. The good thing about that is that people get the chance to be really interdisciplinary. The negative is the different types of cultural ways of working. An architect somebody from design working with somebody who paints or is a sculptor is getting them to figure out how they will work together, but you bring them together on things like climate, EDI, social justice, or computing, or you find these ways to navigate. But if a parent is in that space, we're not thinking about it. If we've got somebody from an international background that has no idea about something that's very London-centric, because the curriculum is quite London-centric. Yes, we come and learn and what have you, but if you can't see yourself in the curriculum, and that's what this is for me, I can't see myself as a parent in the curriculum.
Yeah, thank
That's
you.
part of it as well.
I think as student parents, we feel like we're putting people out by asking to leave early, arrive a bit late. Can we please be the first to present for an assessment because we've got to go and collect the kids from school or whatever. So you feel like you're on the back foot all the time.
That was actually going to be one of my questions. I was just going to say one more question and then maybe bring it out to the floor. But something that came out of Hettie, your presentation, was the overlap between the things that we're discussing here to do with motherhood and parenting, but there was an awful lot of misogyny. Misogyny directed from women to women, but internalised misogyny, the feelings of guilt and shame that come with overly apologising, making yourself small in spaces, removing yourself from spaces, and all of that kind of thing. Maybe, Hettie, you could talk about that and then we could...
I felt like Lulu was just kind of...
Do you want to...
I just think it is definitely one of those things that people do, that the mums or the parents and the carers do. they don't want to put everybody out because we're probably a bit like that anyway. And when it's not considered something that should be made accessible to us, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think this thing of kind of, I mean, it's one of the reasons that we set up the Art Working Parents Alliance was to make people visible to one another, because that whole thing of like, is it just us and not seeing yourself reflected is very easy, because quite often you are the people that are dashing away really quickly, so you're not socialising. And lots of the people that responded to Second Shift are talking a lot about missing out on that kind of like soft networking that comes
100%.
out of ours. So I think it's when we don't see the other people who are in comparable situations, that's when it becomes very easy to feel that you're a kind of margin rather than perhaps potentially at the hub of the experience. And I'd be really interested to know how many faculty or staff or precarious workers, you know, amongst the staff at somewhere like the Royal College of Art are actually parents, because I presume it's actually quite a large number. Yeah, and if it's like 40% of the staff are parents, and it may well be more than that, then this shouldn't just be like some marginal concern. This should be really central, because this applies to all of those parents as well. And it kind of also, I mean, I know that the misogyny, the internalised misogyny is really important, but I do think it's this thing where under patriarchy, you know, it's bad for everyone, because it also, there's clearly this, you know, onus on male faculty not to talk about their caregiving responsibilities, not to take their parental leave, and not to say, actually, I need to leave now and go and pick up my children. I think it's, you know, we also have to kind of make it everybody's concern as well, because it does then end up being kind of us making ourselves small too.
But I think it also goes back, we need, you know, you're saying if you've got a vast number of women teaching and providing education at the RCA, which there are, but it goes back to that, if they're only doing 3 hours and being paid for those 3 hours, they can't do more to
And they risk
us.
not getting rehired. And I
Yeah.
think this is really just about the neoliberal university structure, right? Actually, if you get rid of precarity, you solve this problem really easily, because, well, not easily, but more easily, because people can advocate for themselves and for others around them. But if, you know, we are pushing out 1,200 art graduates a year in London universities, which is obscene, because God knows we probably don't need more artists, maybe we do. But, you know, all of those people down the track are going to be looking for jobs. So you have this sense of like, if I don't say yes, if I don't agree, if I'm not flexible, if I make out like I'm, you know, difficult, there's just like 100 people waiting behind me.
Yeah, the fear of culture of fear.
Yeah, but there was one person that responded to the survey. She was working basically like 3 0-hour contracts with 3 different universities in different places in the UK with a small child.
Well, I was doing this with 3 under 5 when I moved to the UK, and I was teaching in Coventry, I was teaching in Oxford, and I was teaching in Farnham on 0-hour contracts. Sometimes if I missed my book train, it was costing me more to get to Coventry than I was getting paid. And it meant that my partner had to work less hours that day so he could do the school pickups. And I was just like, I just need to do this for a couple of years until I get a proper job.
And it's that thing of them dangling a proper position in front of you.
100%, yeah. So I just, it's a lot of us living in London are commuting out to other universities, to, you know, particularly in our early career stages. Yeah.
I'm conscious of time, and I want to open the questions out. And also, it doesn't just have to be a question, it can also just be a comment or an experience if you want to share it with us here.
We have one at the
Yes, one at the back here.
and one at the front. If we start at the back, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle. And if you just want to say your name or not.
So my name's Yolanda. I was at an art history conference quite recently, and I was looking around at the books, and I was really touched that there was a book with Ruth Asawa, and had Mother Artist in the title. So what I also wondered is how much, so this is looking at the curriculum of art schools, how much do they profile mother artists actually when they case study? Because if you think about it, Artemisia Gentileschi had children. There are a lot of highly successful women throughout art history, women artists, who have had children and have been highly successful. So just to have these role models, do you see what I mean? and with herself I had 6 children, so do you see what I mean? And I agree that sometimes their success happens afterwards and it does take a long, long time, but that can be very kind of motivational.
Thank you. Does anyone want to respond to that?
I think it's important to get them to come back and do the teaching.
Might be a bit late for Artemisia.
For those who are still with us.
Yeah. You know, Cornelia Parker's got a daughter. I mean, there are loads of women artists who have been mothers and have carved out amazingly successful careers, but you need to know about it.
Yeah, they need to be.
Do you know what I mean? And you need to profile it, you need to study it, and you need to inspire people so that, as you say, they don't think that being a parent or a mother is, oh, I have to keep apologising. No, I don't. I've got this role model up who's successful and they did it and I'm going to do it as well, yeah.
Thank you.
I feel like a bit of I feel like a bit of an egomaniac. I did write an art history of motherhood that came out last year, which is all about. So if you need an art history about it, which is all about mothers in the art world throughout history, it exists. Yes, it's called Acts of Creation.
Catherine, did you have something you wanted to?
Thank you for your presentations. I guess I wanted to think about what the positives are, because the title of this panel is called The Impact of Motherhood within Art Schools and Institutions. And I know there have been some suggestions for improvements, but I actually have found that the art school has been actually quite a useful place to be a parent in, and I wonder whether we could just reflect actually on a slightly different structure of art departments and art schools from other university departments, and the way that they do actually support much more part-time and flexible working. I mean, I know that the way you framed it, Kate, is as if everyone's on a precarious contract, and I know that's still a big problem in a lot of schools, but actually there has been a lot of organisation to try and create kind of better permanent contracts within art departments, and actually it has been a way of progressing as a parent without having to be a full-time worker. And I guess one thing that I would sort of put in this conversation, which is really about kind of how we frame work and how we frame a career, and the kind of the need for slowness. And that might not be about being a parent, but it might be having a different model of success. And for me, I may be lucky because, I'm 50, so I taught in art schools and art departments, over the last sort of 15, 20 years in London, but it actually provided me that ability to balance elements of my life. So I'm also kind of aware that sometimes how this has been framed, it seems like there's a no-win situation. And I kind of think that the art school has actually been a really kind of productive and supportive space in some places. And we do need to fight to keep that. And part of that is kind of by modelling how to be a parent scholar, how to be a parent artist, and kind of allowing those moments. And that's different to the sort of policy work. That is also important. I think unless your students see you with your kids, unless you kind of say, no, I can't do that evening one because I'm going to hang out with my kids, and you do have to say no to a lot of things. I think, and that can be difficult as London gets more and more expensive, and like cost of living, like kind of the model of being a part-time worker is not always possible. But I think for me, that possibility of progressing and having a really quite sort of supportive and interesting career as a part-time worker has been something that was only possible within the kind of art department and art school context, because they often expected artists to go off and take a year off to do the Venice Biennale or a big show at Tate. And so if you went off and had a baby, you could be like, well, that's like my Tate retrospective. Do you know what I mean? In a way that in a humanities department, that's not so possible. So I just I was interested in sort of hearing like the sort of the positive sort of possibilities that parents can bring to our sense of work and kind of art practice. And maybe it kind of follows on a little bit about this kind of different kind of career that a lot of parents have, and how they might not be well known at 20, but they might be well known at 50 or 60 or 70. And I think sometimes that I just want to put like a sort of a little bit more positivity into the context of the art school, because I do hope we come back to that better model. It will take a lot of organising and a lot of union work to get there, but it is possible you know, like I know departments that have that system set up that is a very viable system.
Thank you.
Can I quickly respond to that?
Yes.
Before I had children, I worked in museums and galleries, and as soon as I had kids, I realised I could not do that anymore, and that's when I switched into academia for all the reasons that you're saying, Catherine. Because hey, look, I've got a summer off. Okay, so yes, it means I can't write a book or, you know, be like productive and progress my career as quickly, but still I'm not tied to a desk. You know, so I totally hear what you're saying. Yeah.
Oh, we've got Lana had a question.
I just wanted to add what the lady said earlier. Rachel Rash had 14 kids. She was the most successful flower painter of her time. I'm a mother and an artist and spent 8 years interviewing mothers for projects about breastfeeding and women's experience of birth. And I really like what you say about motherhood, because for me motherhood was an unexpected privilege after a 9-year fertility journey, so I sort of embraced it even though I lost my job. And I redesigned my life around an art practice and then spoke to lots of other women about it. And what I would like to add to that idea, because I think it's true that we should be teaching about women who have children, we should be thinking about art and creativity and motherhood as all being part of one thing. But we do need a bit of structural change around the career of the artist, because there's so many competitions and residencies, etc., that you can't enter if you're over 35. And a lot of women have spent, like I did, years getting pregnant, then years raising a child, maybe possibly a neurodiverse child, and then you get to I'm in my mid-50s, and now it feels like, oh, I'm literally going to be one of those artists that's never going to be discovered because it's just taken too bloody long. And all the opportunities for the emerging artists are all kind of for young artists. And so I do think there's a structural issue there about, coming to it later and in some ways having so much more to say and being at the peak of your power and then thinking, oh, but I'm too old. It's really frustrating.
They changed the Turner Prize, didn't they?
That one prize they changed. Yeah, but I really think there shouldn't be age brackets on any.
I think I agree. It's a form of discrimination anyway.
Especially towards caregivers.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lana Locke. I'm an artist and a senior lecturer at UAL, Camberwell College of Art. I became a mother doing my PhD and made a film which shown before.
I was thinking about it all through Hettie's presentation.
I'm happy to share it, but of expressing milk in toilets, and I think some of the positivity is also comes from recognition of these issues with other across other universities and across other practitioners and educators. So I think it's been such a brilliant event this evening to hear about the issues, but actually think about what we can do to change them makes me feel positive as well. And which is not to say that there's so many good things about motherhood, but actually thinking about what we can do in terms of our own agency, I think is really positive. I think the creche one is quite difficult because of how far we're all commuting, and it's often just not practical to take our kids on transport to get to have a creche at the university. So I think that complicates it a little bit. But one of the facts that I think that Hettie had in her slide was around the structure of term dates, and that seems really right across all universities. And I still, even department heads, and I've had this conversation, no one seems to know how we can change the structure of the term date so that they're aligned with school terms.
Academic boards.
Yeah.
Academic boards is where those decisions are made.
Have you had any progress in that with your
I make arrangements for all of my staff with childcaring responsibilities so that their teaching is moved around if reading weeks and things aren't coinciding. But again, this is a local issue. This is something I can deal with locally. It's not
As their line manager.
as their line manager.
Why are the academic boards so resistant to aligning.
Have you looked at an academic board lately?
But it's also just different school councils have different holidays, so even within London, trying to map the Courtauld, Courtauld and KCL are synced, but you know, actually it's not as straightforward. There's not just one set school holiday. I agree, we could definitely sync it up more, but if you try to poll the parents in an institution, their children are all going to be across different.
And we have a third that live outside London.
So I mean, UAL has an even more baroque system of holidays.
Well, the students went back before Easter.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's one that I think you could definitely. I'm not sure why UAL has gone to that, but there will have been some choice of the semester breakdown, but that would require quite a lot of work to change the semester structure. I know here that because we're now keyed into KCL, we'd have to then get KCL to change it for us to change it. So yeah, they're often quite tricky decisions.
And they're made from pedagogical reasons surrounded, around teaching delivery rather than staff availability. Do you know what I mean? Like that would be the lens through which the academic board are thinking about that. So we have just changed, you'll know, Catherine, we've just changed to start later in January, which means that we've got to come back after Easter and do 2 weeks of teaching most years, which is going to be a pain in the arse. But
I've seen that.
but they're thinking about teaching and the experience of students.
Student parents, though, does it?
No, but there's such a minor thing, I guess.
I'm conscious of time, we're just a few minutes over. Does anybody else have any final contribution that they'd like to make? Jessie?
I just have a question for you, Kate. The research you're doing is clear, it feels really important.
Yeah, distressing.
You mentioned how it's like a free-for-all, these commercial environments. And I was just wondering, once the research has been done and you put the report together, what your plans are in terms of the next steps to just get this information in front of the people who need to see it most, but would probably try and avoid seeing it if they could.
So where we're submitting it for publication is in a special issue that's coming out of Southampton, Bournemouth, one of those ones down there, a special issue around women in leadership in the creative industries. So we framed it very much as like an obstacle to leadership, because what we have essentially found is that women go back into the workplace after they've had, and parents, we've interviewed some men as well, go back into the workplace after they've had their babies, and they just go, this is not going to work. So they sidestep into a different role. So if they were in sales where they were earning 120 grand, and now they're going into, I don't know, educational partnerships or something where they're earning less but the hours are fixed, or they're moving out of the industry entirely. Anyway, so that's the context that it's going to be published. And then once it's published, we can start, generating some wider discussions about it.
Maybe we'll have the final question or comment.
It's very short.
Michelle.
Just a really brief follow-up. So have you found in that research any examples of good practice where it's making because we need to make the case to private the commercial galleries that it's good business practice to embrace parental leave and motherhood, etc.
I think maybe it was someone brought it up today, but it was to do with we actually found 3 examples where people had amazing experiences and all their bosses were men. And I think this goes to previous research that I've done, is that there is a lot of internalised misogyny in our sector, and these were men who maybe had a disabled child or had who were parents, or just had a different sort of cultural experience of being a parent, or whatever, And they were just like, yeah, sure, work from home, no worries. You know, like, so there were good examples. There were also some genuinely horrific, like these people could go to prison examples as well.
I've got a positive. Kate McGarry, we shared an art fair booth with her a couple of years ago, and I was talking to her, and she had all of her various different staff members were all on maternity leave, and she was like, well, I don't mind. She said, all of my staff are mothers. She said, if you want something done, ask a busy person.
Damn right.
That's the truth.
Thank you so much for everybody coming today to see. We don't have time for, so yes, thank you and have a lovely evening.
And Michelle, thank you so much.
Michelle.
Just one final note that the recording for this will be captioned and posted on the Courtauld YouTube channel, so if you want to kind of go back and watch later, it will be available probably next week.
Thank you. And I also always forget that the Art Working Parents Alliance is just a self-selecting membership, so you can just pop onto our website. There's a little registration form which takes 15 seconds, and Hettie or I will register you and add you to our mailing list, and we run regular events, and there are also community irregular events, and there are community events, and you'll get also you can get connected to people in your local area and everything, so please do register.
Our next event is on the 7th of June. We're going to go to the First Sight in Colchester to have a special morning with Elsa James for her exhibition, so she's giving us an exclusive tour, and then we're doing an in-conversation afterwards at 11 o'clock on Saturday morning.
And there's also going to be a follow-up event to this via Broadly Conceived, which is in May. Can't remember what.
We will share the information after.
Yes. Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.